Now let's dive deep into this big LGBTQ story for today. I'm Larry Farver, and let's queer up the USA view. San Francisco Pride loses major sponsors but fights to stay afloat. San Francisco's 2025 Pride celebration is facing a $300,000 shortfall after a major corporate sponsors, including Anheuser-Busch, withdrew their support. The brewing giant, along with La Crema and Diageo and Comcast, blame the decision on financial constraints, but Pride organizers suspect a deeper motive. Suzanne Ford, executive director of San Francisco Pride, called the move, quote, very abnormal, end quote, noting that the long-term sponsors typically discuss funding concerns before pulling out. She added, quote, I just interpreted that companies are making decisions at this time. It's not to be good to be sponsoring Pride, end quote. However, despite the funding loss, Ford says Pride will go on as many people rely on it. It is not the first time Anheuser-Busch has let the community down. In the 2023 controversy, the company faced right-wing backlash over a Bud Light promotion featuring transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney. As a response to the backlash, it chose to distance itself from the community. Our nonprofit LGBTQ media company Hotspots Happening Out produces 3 Pride events in South Florida, notably including the June Stonewall Pride, August PrideFete, and next February's Pride Fort Lauderdale. We are just days away from Palm Beach, Tampa, and Miami Beach Pride, and sources have relayed concerns about the anti-DEI initiatives and how they will affect the basics of celebrating LGBTQ Pride. As we move toward June Pride Month, this story is evolving. Stay tuned. Well, I need to say I'm very disappointed in Anheuser-Busch. I'm from New Jersey. That's one of the big beers up there. So I had Bud Lights. They also own Stella Artois. So I'm concerned about that. Looking at some of the others, I'm paying a fortune every month to an affiliate, Xfinity, which is Comcast. So very disappointed in that as well. I think there might be an affiliation, if I'm not mistaken, with Disney. I believe that there's some kind of, and I can check on that further.
I don't think so. You're
no?
thinking Hulu? Yeah, no.
Okay, no,
Comcast is separate.
Okay,
Paramount,
all the companies are in bed with each other. Who knows?
Peacock is the one that you streaming. So.
But Diageo, they own Guinness and Smirnoff, so I'm very disappointed because I've been supportive of those brands as well. Certainly I think we need to look in our community, and if this continues, maybe let our bar owners know what our voice is. I think you're going to also see a difference between the bars that are owned by queer people in our community versus maybe bars that are not owned, they're allies, so to speak, in business, but they buy what they think will sell.
Well, to be honest, I'm not going to force bar owners to dump their reserve of Smirnoff. They bought the stock. They would lose money to replace that stock. And the bar margin is not very thick here in Wilton Manor, since we are used to cheap drinks and we're used to happy hour discounts all the way until like 9 p.m. But on the other but unfortunately, it's very disappointing. I think Comcast made the move because Comcast owns MSNBC and NBC, and NBC News have been critical of Trump, and he is already trying to use his power, his crony in the FCC to try to shut them down or revoke their broadcast license or something of that sort, which is going to end up a giant court fight that will last 10 years. But on the other hand, I'm very disappointed in Anheuser-Busch and Diageo because, let's face it, the queer community are big drinkers. We've supported some of these brands for ages. And Diageo is something that you cannot avoid because they gobbled up almost every other brand we know. They have Captain Morgan, you said the Guinness, Johnny Walker, who doesn't like, Scotch and Coke, or, whiskey. They have the Crown Royal. They basically cover all the drinks that an average gay bar needs.
Well, now, I do want to say, though, when you were talking about the not wanting to pour the alcohol out, few people remember Harvey Milk's first thing in activism was starting a gay bar boycott on Coors Light, and they did dump the Coors Light in the sink. But you know, we're talking all about these specific companies, and, you know, what we think. And like, for me, as someone who's been warning about corporate sponsorship and Pride since literally I wrote about it in The Advocate in 2017, and haven't been talking about it since. I don't view the companies as the problem. They are mindless institutions seeking profit at all cost, and they're not the issue. San Francisco Pride put themselves in a situation where they were dependent on corporations, and now their chickens have come home to roost, quite frankly. I mean, they're too, but this is, let me continue. You know, the thing that I really think that the big issue with these prides is they put in this idea of putting these big events on that need tons of money. The only way they can get that money is with corporations, but corporations are so fickle. You've created a very unstable organization that you're not going to be able to sustain unless you dramatically change Pride and make it go back to being a real activist movement, back to serving our community instead of serving these corporations.
Oh no, I definitely
they got what they deserve. Frankly.
I agree, but change doesn't happen overnight, and most of the events probably are set now. And
you're right. This has been a multi-year problem.
Well, and I would like to add, I mean, I think we need to look very closely at the upcoming prides that were just mentioned, whether it's, you know, Palm Beach, Miami, our Pride event in Wilton Manors, and then future ones, and really take a close look at who the sponsors are and then look at the products being sold and see if there's a correlation or if there's a big disparity between what's being served and the sponsorship.
Remember, smaller prides are not as corporate focused, partially because corporations don't want to invest in smaller prides. DC, Boston, New York City, San Francisco, LA, those are the big five that tend to be the most into corporate money. New York City Pride is so bad that corporations could pay to be the only company of that industry at the Pride event. In Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a company could pay to be the sponsoring name of the Pride. So they once had a fracking company with the name of their Pride year. This is how Pride has been very out of control with corporate sponsorships, and now that it's no longer cool for a corporation to donate, they're all with their male appendage in the wind, quite frankly.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bobby.
Well, I mean, and also we have to bear in mind, all these DEI crackdowns. I mean, I'm not even sure if we were allowed to have Pride. I mean, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about it in the news piece that we're going to cover tonight. But we might be following, the footsteps of authoritarianism, and people are, any kind of distinct ethnicity or identity, any kind of identity-focused event will be snuffed out because, it's somehow like DEI or something.
You say that, but then I look at everyone gets affected. As an Irish, Italian American, there's already two events where my people would get upset. Queer people would get upset. Everyone has some background. And, the idea of trying to ban all of that, I just think couldn't happen.
Yeah, and you look, I did a story recently where they talked about Staten Island being, having their first inclusive gay inclusion within a St. Patty's Day parade after all of the rest of the boroughs of New York allowed it. So, I think we need to look too, if we need to, maybe we need to become less dependent, as you alluded to before, Bobby, on some of these sponsorships. I remember going back to when I was, again, very, very young, but building floats in New Jersey for the New York Pride Parade. We raised our own funds. We built things, the parade floats, out of our own money. And we did very well.
You look at Carnival in P-Town.
Absolutely.
They'll sometimes have one big sponsor, like JetBlue or something. But almost some years, there's no big corporate sponsor, and they have a great time.
I think it's still in my intro, but back in the day when I was really doing parade floats for fun, in addition to politics, we had a great inn. It's no longer owned by the same people, but Carpe Diem on Johnson Street used to sponsor. And we started out with a very low budget. We supplemented it, but we got money from them. And we were able to rent a Mack truck, have a driver, and we built our float. A lot of it was constructed in New Jersey, and we brought it up in our cars. So we can do things like that in other ways to, whether we're rallying, we're creating Pride events. We certainly have great gay, lesbian, and trans and ally sponsors like the pub in Wilton Manors. So I think we need to really look inside and then look at, what was said before with Robert Keston and Stonewall Museum.
I believe that's what needs to change. We should have floats that are more protest focused instead
Yes.
of celebrating, because
Yes.
we're under attack now. We're in defense mode. We don't have to,
We-
instead of celebrating, we need
Well,
to be
we can go back
protesting.
to, it might not be as exciting, but we can glam it up or whatever we want to do, but we can be contingents and have our banners. I've carried many a banner back in the day.
Oh yeah, March is like literally the piece I wrote in 2017 was because the way people were getting so no longer feeling that Pride was speaking for us. There was a DC Pride March that counter to the parade, and I found the march was people found that to be much more engaging.
Yes.
LA Pride, I believe, actually. Some years have been only a march. They said, we're not even going to bother with the parade. We're going to just do the march. So yeah,
Yes.
It's something that we might see more of. Though I just want to add, like, when I talk about like corporate money, I do mean corporations. Like the local bar, I don't treats us in the fair weather friend way that like Wells Fargo does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And that is a big LGBTQ story for today. There's no other queer nonprofit media platform like this in the entire world. Support our LGBTQ stories by subscribing and sharing Queer News Tonight.